Hey there, it's Brendan, and I wanted to insert this quick preamble to this repost. Yes, one more. I know I said I was done last week if you heard that episode with Waco Lynn, but I decided to repost If I Knew You Better yet again, and I will probably have one more episode of this I'm going to do. But I want to mention this to you. I have toyed with mothballing this show, My Beloved Big Fish in the Middle Kingdom, once before. I even announced it and did it once, then I brought it back when I came back to China. But I'm about to do it for real. Now, the catalog of this show will stay live forever. I will keep paying to keep this active, and I hope that people continue to discover the episodes that I did with all these interesting people. I will certainly reshare them. I refer to them a lot in my conversation when I meet new people or suggest that they would like to know somebody's story. It might be interesting to them. But moving forward, all of my new one-on-one interviews that I do, plus the occasional China-focused special feature like I do Fretful Laowai with Kevin Geiger, I'm going to move those or do those on If I Knew You Better. Part of what changed my mind about cross-posting If I Knew You Better here on Big Fish again is that this week's guest has all these China insights, and his name is Michael NAKAN, as you see from the title, if you looked at that first. And he is a Londoner who came of age in entertainment, initially actually in the Hollywood system. He worked on House of Cards, and then later he worked for HBO in New York before moving back to London. And he has a China office for his company and is using the China-British angle as a way to develop entertainment projects, which is a channel that's really not open to us for China Hollywood stuff anymore. And I thought, especially given that there's so many people who are interested in general and people who are successfully working in a business sense here between cultures, across cultures, or more specifically in entertainment, this episode is really valuable, and I wanted to be sure to share it with you. But next week's If I Knew You Better will be a solo show where I'm going to discuss some pretty major life-changing events, some things I've been going to on the personal front that relate to the professional front, and everything else will become a lot more clear. But after that episode, I'm going to stop cross-posting here for good from If I Knew You Better, and I'm not going to post new shows. So I hope that you will please subscribe to If I Knew You Better. The links are in the show notes here, or you can visit crazyinagoodway.com to find all my shows and much, much more. And from the bottom of my heart, thank you for listening. I will have one more sort of wrap-up show for Big Fish that's a solo show before we put it to bed for good. But now, please enjoy today's show with Michael NAKAN. Welcome back to If I Knew You Better. I'm Brendan Davis, your host, and my guest this week is Michael NAKAN. Michael is the founder of Clipper Media Capital. They are a London-based production and consulting company, and they have a beachhead here in China, where I am coming to you from once again. More on my plans regarding that very soon. Now, Michael is in a very unique position. He was born and raised in London. His parents are from South Africa, and they sent him to an American international school in London and then college in the U.S. And his accent, as he describes it, he sounds much more like a Yank, like an American than he does a Londoner. But his very first Hollywood jobs were actually also in the U.S., first working on the show House of Cards for a season, so about a year and a half. And then he went to work in New York for HBO. And these things have really marked him as a true grown-up version of a third culture kid. We kind of talk about that aspect of his upbringing in the show and how we need a term that's a little more grown-up than saying third culture kid, but he definitely fits the bill for that. Now, among other things, we discuss how the China-UK relationship is growing and getting stronger, as opposed to the one where I've plied my trade for the previous number of years, the China Hollywood one. There is lots to learn from Michael here. He is a great guy with lots of killer insights into the present state of things. And so I think that not only a round two follow-up chat on the mic, as well as some beers off of it, are on my agenda related to Michael. I have some other things on my agenda too, though, that I want to talk about, and they're pretty varied. I have an interview in the works here that's going to take me a little bit more time to prepare for than normal, and more than I will have to devote to it this week. I have a lot of background reading to do. So this next week's show will be my first solo show on If I Knew You Better. And I'm thinking of it as a candid, in-depth look at some of the many world-altering things in my own life recently that have shifted my intended trajectory in various ways. One of those is a proper shift from Big Fish in the Middle Kingdom to this show as my main one-on-one interview outlet. I have tried to retire Big Fish in the Middle Kingdom before, and it's hard because that show has built some real traction with people, but it's time for lots of reasons. One of the big reasons is my own career focus shift away from being here and back to the Western markets. All my development is offshore, is not in China now, but I do have some business interests here, so I'm going to keep a aspect of my business and life here, but I am basically going to be focusing more on my creative development with a more global perspective. And some of my projects are going to be China friendly or China involved, but not everything. So as Michael NAKAN and I talk about in this interview, the writing is really on the wall here. And the near and medium term opportunities for guys like me are, in my opinion, just not worth the extraordinary sacrifices that have to be made to see them through. The world isn't just changing, it's changed. And whether you're a factory worker in the U.S. Rust Belt who's clinging to false promises that are based on a fallacious future that is promised by a felonious father figure of a leader, or a smartass West Coast globalist like myself whose own tolerance for the stage-managed theater that we call public discourse is equally lacking, just from the opposite direction, we are all mandated to wake up and smell the non-fair trade coffee of reality. So for my part, I have to be in a place, both physically and metaphysically, where these types of conversations aren't proscribed, or even worse, where they mostly fall on deaf ears or ears that just simply can't hear them. But hey, more about all that and me next week. After the show here, you can visit Crazy in a Good Way to find links and show notes and more, and learn how to contact Michael or learn about his company. Now, please enjoy my excellent conversation with Michael NAKAN. Well, I'm here with Michael NAKAN. Michael, good to see you here, man.
Very good to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Brendan.
I am happy to have you here. We met just this past Sunday. Now, I'm speaking in the present tense. This show is going to come out in a week from now, but we met at a Johns Hopkins University alumni event where one of my friends and partners, Jonathan Garrison, is an alum, as are you, and you were the featured speaker at this film-related event. And I got to know you a bit, both from what you presented, and then we started chatting afterwards, and now here we are. That's okay. That's okay. That's a little carbonated water in the background.
Nothing else. Don't worry.
Nothing there. Well, we haven't perfected the technology for that to be offensive yet.
Yeah.
And this is how the show is. It's this kind of conversation.
Right.
So, how do you introduce yourself to people who you would like to know better?
Well, I think the primary thing to take away from me is I have a very unique upbringing. My upbringing was in the UK, but as you can tell, and any listener can tell, you can't really figure that out from my accent, which is more sort of Yankee than Queen's English. I went to an American school in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
The American school in the UK primarily caters to the children of expats. Mm-hmm. But because my family were expats, but not from America, from South Africa, I was sort of sent into that system. Mm-hmm. And as a result of growing up in this kind of third culture, I then went to university in the United States, worked in the United States, moved back to the UK, and have started an international film and television company, which draws quite heavily upon my sort of unique background and a sort of translocation between multiple cultures that I've experienced. Although my secret is that I'm really bad at languages. You'd think I'd be good at languages with an upbringing, nice. But I guess it's British, American, South African, English.
You speak three kinds of English.
Exactly. Three different types of English slang is all I got, unfortunately. No Afrikaans, no Xhosa, nothing more interesting. So yeah,
very nice. It's funny because the specific event where we met was you talking about what you're doing here in China with your company that's a UK company, and part of what and we'll get into this in a lot more detail as we go, but pretty much instantly, especially given what's happening with the whole U.S.-China trade war situation as we record this. Hopefully in the time capsule in a year from now, you go, what trade war?
No, it'll be resolved by the time.
It'll be hopefully, week and a half. Week and a half tops, right?
Week and a half will be good.
But the reality is that there are starting to be some knock-on effects, and I'm seeing in my sort of in the professional China Hollywood WeChat group and things like that of actor friends who are like legit professional American actors here who are being uncast from projects. One friend sadly just found out the other day that he's being cut out completely, and they have to, I guess, probably recast somebody and shoot additional scenes only because he's American. But like the edicts, it's getting very serious. And I knew that going to your event. So when you're talking in there about being a bridge between China and the UK, I thought that's the right opportunity right now because for a lot of reasons, and I'd rather hear you talk about it than me. But so let's go through some of the chronological stuff. I just want to set a context for where we're going with this.
Sure.
So your roots are really that you are a Londoner, but your family's from South Africa, and then, as you said, you were immersed in the American style system in London, and then went to college. So you went to Johns Hopkins in the U.S.
I did, yeah.
Maybe. How do you think that all that got you on this path you're on today?
I think it was a path that reflects very much sort of a multiple kind of pronged approach that I've always had. I think I've always been someone who was destined to be an entrepreneur and try my best to have my own company. As in the past, I've always wanted to do things differently and look for new opportunities. And I think that's a personality trait that some people have. And I think for me, the way that has always manifested itself is looking at other cultures and other sort of countries' models for doing things.
Right.
Growing up between three cultures as distinct as South Africa, the UK, and the US, you see how the same things are, because they broadly have the same value systems.
Yeah.
But you see how the same things can be approached from many different ways, depending on history, local political events, capitalism versus, a more kind of liberalist or socialist perspective in the UK. And as a result, I think for me, I've never been sort of content with the status quo or someone saying this is the way things are, because I know from my upbringing that things, in a country like South Africa can change in a moment's notice. In a country like the US, can change for other reasons, corporate reasons or money-driven reasons or political reasons. And a country like the UK, it is more kind of, more stable because it's such an old country. But of course, even what we've seen recently politically in the UK is that, those old world orders can be disrupted. So I think that's how, that cultural dislocation is how I ended up in the international Chinese, bringing together all of these things. But crucially, I don't make, screw nuts or, oil rigs or anything like that. I'm a filmmaker, producer, and I think that comes from an innate sort of love of storytelling that I've always had from a young age. And
I know a bit of this because I got to hear you do a less exciting version of it. And I was kidding. That was very nice, but I realized I need to have Michael on the show. So as I understand it, your primary focus originally was writing, and you sort of developed this passion in or around the time you went to the States to Johns Hopkins?
Exactly. So my initial kind of plan when I was younger was to be a journalist, and I was on a bevy of kind of school newspapers. That was always my sort of primary extracurricular activity outside of sports. And what happened was in Baltimore, at the Johns Hopkins newsletter, which is the sort of local student newspaper for Johns Hopkins, I got to be a managing editor in my sophomore year. I wrote an article that was covered in the Baltimore Sun about juvenile justice in Baltimore, which is, and the kind of tragedy that unfolds the whole time in that particular city, being a very poor city in Maryland, a very rich state, how the sort of young offenders are treated really, really badly. And we can go into that if you're interested. But that article ended up being covered in the Baltimore Sun. And as a result of that, Hopkins, I applied for and got a really terrific Hopkins grant to make a documentary on the subject. So Hopkins was hugely helpful in my sort of professional development as well as my sort of educational one, because it provided this really great opportunity for getting $10,000 to make a documentary as a teenager, basically.
Wow.
And I went off and made that documentary, and through the making of it, I rediscovered my love of film and television, and that documentary ended up sort of directly leading to my first first Hollywood job on House of Cards.
Yeah, so talk about that.
Being shot in Baltimore at the time.
Yeah, so I have this question that's, there are bullet points. What do you consider to be your first real success? I would say that article that puts you on the map was that success, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think looking back at it, you could say you can always go further back.
Sure.
First real success is getting into a prestigious school like Johns Hopkins or what have you. But I think that article, which I wrote, which was in the Baltimore Sun, helped me really to realize that it's possible to get into the media and kind of it's not this kind of world which is completely separate to our own world, and you just read people's bylines. These are people that you can meet and you can interact with, and the Baltimore Sun is an institution which you can be published in.
Right.
And obviously Baltimore Sun is a very small newspaper in the global sense, but at the time it felt very big. Of course, as a university student, as a freshman in university.
And it has a national presence.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
For sure.
And indeed, you can still Google me and find that
what's
article.
what's the headline of the article?
I can't recall the headline. It was an opinions piece that was basically in the newsletter and then moved to the Baltimore Sun, and it basically was a cut down version of one of my course papers, which revolved around this Baltimore Juvenile Justice Center, which is a institution designed to hold sort of juvenile delinquents before they are sentenced or in juvenile speak adjudicated.
Sure.
And the idea is that when they're adjudicated, they're sent to a rehabilitation center to serve their time or to be rehabilitated into society. What I found to be really appalling, as admittedly a sort of naive freshman from the UK, but what I found particularly appalling was that in this juvenile justice center, which is only designed to hold juveniles before they go to court, right? So it's supposed to be max 3 days.
Okay.
Kids can often end up there for a year plus.
Wow.
And the crazy thing to me, and this is maybe from my more European sort of background, the crazy thing is that that time doesn't count toward the time they're sentenced towards.
Oh, right.
Because that's not time they're being, in air quotes, rehabilitated. They're waiting to be placed in a rehabilitation center.
Right.
So there's a phrase in Baltimore amongst kind of the youth of Baltimore, which is waiting time is wasted time. And so I just found that to be so kind of shocking and sort of, for a country like the United States, which I'd always grown up with this very kind of rosy Hollywood picture of what the U.S. was like.
We sold it pretty well, and it used to be a lot different.
Yeah.
Both things are true.
Absolutely. So I was really surprised to see that, and indeed, kind of being in Baltimore was a very interesting eye-opener.
Yeah, because Baltimore defines gritty.
Absolutely,
There are all these great, there's The Wire. I mean, you can just look, ask David Simon about Baltimore.
Absolutely.
There's all kinds of great stories about the reality of what a tough place it is.
Absolutely. And it's a city that is getting better, and I had a really terrific time at Hopkins, but I think that, it has a special place in my heart. Its nickname is Charm City, and it deserves it, I think. It has other nicknames, too, which are less nice, involving, involving the H word, but, it's it was startling coming from a British perspective where our sort of left behind cities, and of course we do have a lot of them, particularly in the northeast of the country, aren't as sort of startlingly sort of grim and startlingly segregated and separate. Baltimore, Johns Hopkins in particular, does a great job of bringing work to Baltimore, helping people, sort of move beyond their station and kind of, and get employed and all that of the local community. I think maybe more so than any other university I've ever seen. But, the fact remains that it is a very racially segregated city, and it's a surprise to see that coming from a more not perfect, but a more
cosmopolitan,
more integrated, at least London existence, which I appreciate I appreciate now more than I did then, is a very unique place that not many, if any, other cities in the world has accomplished. Not saying it's perfect, it's not, but it's better than Baltimore. I'll say that.
Well, I mean, you mentioned this, and we need a new term because third culture kid seems to not fit you when you're more of a grown up. But that's something that's been talked about a lot on I'm going to cross-post this on Big Fish in the Middle Kingdom because we're going to get to all your China experience too.
Yeah.
And we talked about that a good bit here with people that really helped, define or own that label. But yeah, that seems that it would have, this you were really wired to think different, as Steve Jobs and many other people have said. Let's talk about how you, we could probably do a whole show just on your time in Baltimore, specifically from Hopkins and what you learned from that. But you mentioned that this got you your first real industry job on House of Cards, and I know you ended up as a producer. It must be. Did you start as a PA, or did you? What was the path like? Let's talk about this. Again, there's a little bit of a Hollywood ear to the show, and people who are aspiring.
Absolutely.
So what was kind of your story of how you got in and path a little bit?
Absolutely. Well, it was very lucky, as everyone I'm sure will say, from a sort of Hollywood or any film industry perspective. It was typified by both luck and kind of international perspective, I would say.
Okay.
So initially it was this sort of documentary, which I did everything on, and I'm proud of in some ways, but it's not a perfect film. But
I haven't made a perfect one yet. I've made a lot of them.
That was the one film which I kind of made, and at this point, like everyone, writer-director, I wanted to be writer-director. I was introduced by someone at Hopkins who'd seen the documentary to a producer of House of Cards named Josh Donnan, who has been a very valued mentor of mine throughout my career. And he helped me get a job working with Beau Willimon on House of Cards. I say working in the kind of the loosest sense, in that, I was with him a lot and I got a lot of very valuable experience, but I was kind of carrying his coffee and, his pens and so forth. So I was a combination of a PA and an assistant.
Right.
So I was a sort of runner, as we say in the UK, or PA in the US. I'm making people closing down sets.
But you were kind of his guy.
But I was also his guy. He had he had.
And he's the writer creator of House of Cards. For people who maybe don't know.
Yes, sorry. So he's a writer creator of House of Cards, and he had a terrific kind of full-time writer's assistant named Tin Jin Gu, who is a Shanghai-born Chinese American, and whom I still have a very close relationship with, and we have projects together for the Asian market. But my role was sort of to be on the set with Beau, helping him with everything.
Sure.
So I got a really good insight into how a Hollywood show like that is run, through the kind of through the eyes of a very prestigious, and really incredibly talented showrunner. So that was a really terrific experience for me. Following that experience, I was lucky enough to transition into working at HBO in New York. And that role came about again, actually, through a Hopkins, something I did at Hopkins. I made a Rush video for my fraternity, which went viral.
Okay.
It was a parody of the Wolf of Wall Street trailer.
Okay.
And it went viral, and I used...
For good reasons, I hope?
Yeah, for very good reasons. It was very good. And through that, I applied to a creative services role at HBO. Creative services, now renamed Creative Marketing, are in charge of trailers, marketing, EPKs, behind the scenes, that kind of thing, primarily for Game of Thrones. And so I transitioned from House of Cards to working on the kind of marketing team for Game of Thrones.
Nice.
So the two skill sets are quite unrelated, but it makes sense from a kind of narrative position from House of Cards to Game of Thrones. And my role there was much more of an editing role, actually.
Okay.
So I went to Belfast and, was involved in kind of EPK shoots, so behind the scenes shoots.
Okay. All those shoots with Dan and Dave and
exactly.
Kind of stuff.
Interviews with George R. R. Martin and so forth. I didn't go to all of those, indeed not even to that many of them, but I cut a lot of the sort of associated material for Game of Thrones season 5 in particular. Okay. So not to.
Well, I was going to ask you for how long were you at House of Cards and how long were you at HBO?
So it was only in summation about sort of 18 months. So I was on one season of House of Cards, then I was at HBO until such point that my visa ran out.
Oh, okay.
So my visa ran out when I was at HBO, and I had to return to the UK. At the time, I was quite upset about that because HBO was such a great employer and I had such a good experience there. But in the end, it turned out to be a very helpful experience for me. Yeah. And I can go on.
Yeah, well, my question is basically, where did you go from there?
Yeah.
For better or for worse?
So when I landed back in the UK, I had been sort of preparing myself for a move back to a country in which I was raised, but a culture that was somewhat foreign to me. By leveraging all of my American connections that I sort of carefully cultivated throughout my internships and my experience. And when I moved back, I kind of swiftly got a role with NBC International Studios as the assistant to kind of the head of the studio, a guy named Michael Edelstein, who's a really, really talented media executive, international media executive. And off the back of that, I made the jump to work for Shoebox Films as a creative executive. Which is Joe Wright's production company. Joe is best known, of course, for Darkest Hour and Atonement and Black Mirror Nosedive. And my role there, because I had U.S. experience, I kind of got to skip the sort of more assistant rung that I would have had to normally go through, and particularly from a Hollywood perspective. I never spent those sort of 2 or 3 years as kind of an assistant rolling calls like people do in Hollywood. I was very lucky to kind of, because I had that international experience, but a U.S. experience with a British passport, I was able to move into Shoebox Films. Shoebox at this point had a first look deal with a European distributor and was moving into making more TV.
Okay.
So, Shoebox is best known for their films Lock, Denial, Hummingbird, Serenity with Matthew McConaughey that just came out. And we were looking to kind of develop a TV slate. So to the final, shall I keep going?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
So the final. So what I found at Shoebox was I had a really, really terrific experience. Got to know all of the agents in the UK, a lot of the talent in the UK, and what I found was that the UK, as I really got to got to know it better, was a industry that had a supply and demand mismatch in that the supply of kind of British talent far outstripped the demand that we saw from the broadcasters. This admittedly was some time ago, and now it's changing. Okay. So I'd like to caveat it with that, with the arrival of the SVODs, which we can go into later.
Yeah, we'll get to that as we get into China.
We'll get to that later. But at the time, it felt like there was a major opportunity to take this high-end British creative talent, of which there's a huge number, and look for opportunities for them outside of the UK. And the place that I kind of zeroed in on after meeting my business partner, who at the time was a Laowai living in Beijing and then Shanghai, working for a film financing firm, was to bring sort of the best of the British talent that was waiting in the queue in the UK to get a show or a movie off the ground. Bring them out to China and help China achieve their ambitious goal to go from 0 to 100, to go from an industry that didn't really make any high-end premium content 5 to 10 years ago into making something that can compete with Hollywood or British or Western output.
Right. So let's get into the China aspect of this a bit as you enjoy some water there for a second. Let's talk a bit about the how and why, et cetera. How did your China engagement really kick into gear for you? Because
Absolutely.
Again, I think this is the as I said at the beginning of this is a unique advantage you have because you're representing yourself and you as someone from the UK. As far as I know, China still likes you guys.
Yes,
so
exactly.
so this helps, but in a broader sense. People, China Hollywood, I mean, that's a very established path, and there are a lot of us who have a lot of time in that, but there is not that much of a well-trod path, I think, between your country and here. So yes, please.
Well, we'll
all be working for you one day, Michael.
Well, we're doing our honest best to trod that path as we speak now. We have a lot of projects in development that are envisioned as either UK-China co-productions or as, our ideal method, which is helping Chinese companies develop high-end IP, but utilizing the kind of best of British creative practice. So bringing over writers or directors or development producers to work directly through us, both in a language and cultural bridge with Chinese companies. Right. So, it really came about because I was so aware of the Hollywood-China relationship, actually, having worked in Hollywood, lived in the U.S. You didn't have to go far to, read about the latest mega deal that was happening in Hollywood, or the latest film that has secured financing from China and so forth. So, and I've always had a fascination with China and with Chinese culture and history. And so it seemed like when I was in the UK, an obvious choice to at least explore the market, given that it was so clearly emerging. And as I've mentioned, at this point, in sort of around 2014, 2015, there was a bit of a backlog, I think, in terms of British content production. And so I was always kind of very keen to go and look at China. And then I met my business partner, Jake Leland, who had a very interesting kind of experience getting into the Chinese film industry himself, having set up initially a consulting company in China dedicated to helping Chinese kids get into British boarding schools from a more educational background. I
have friends who do that here for kids trying to go to the high-end schools.
Yeah, exactly. So he has a much more country-appropriate accent than me. And he also can speak Chinese, which is hugely helpful.
So I've heard that.
Yes. So,
I speak enough to my superpower is to impress and then confuse Chinese speakers after about 60 seconds.
Very good, very good. I can just about order dinner and I can say 我会说一点普通话. That's it.
Yeah, I speak a little Chinese.
And that's it. And then hand gestures.
Sure, that helps a lot. Yeah, the audience can't see it.
Yeah, but
we're both verbal. We're both talking. We're both big hand talkers.
We're making kind of shadow hand gestures, like acting training over here.
Yes.
So basically, from his background, he came from kind of this entertainment family. His father is a well-known film director named David Leland, did an episode of Band of Brothers and many other very high-quality British films in the past. Worked for a Shanghai-based financier named called Bliss Media, where he had a very good experience and was engaged in bringing Hacksaw Ridge to China. So he had this kind of at the coalface experience of being at the kind of coalface of being helping Hollywood and China kind of connect financially, and he was the one who really told me that there's this very strong opportunity to link the kind of creative sectors.
Right.
And so at the time I said it was a simple kind of supply and demand issue. There's too much creative supply in the UK for not enough demand, and vice versa in China. But what I've really found over the last sort of 18 months to 2 years of doing this a lot and spending a lot of time in China is that there are much deeper kind of opportunities for collaboration between our cultures, not just in the sort of bringing best practices to China, but also in sort of co-productions and cultural exchange. And one day I hope to, not just be bringing British talent to China, but also Chinese talent to the UK. And I think that there's such a strong opportunity to do that because both the UK and China have strong, uninterrupted cultures. And they both have similar attitudes toward, hierarchy and not necessarily hierarchy, that's the wrong word, but, if there is a culture of kind of face in China and saving face
hierarchy definitely
forth,
applies, yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
That doesn't apply so much in the UK. What I mean more is that in the UK, we have kind of a situation of kind of embarrassment is our version of face.
Right.
And as a result, I think that, it's funny to say, but I do think that a lot of the kind of things that other cultures might inadvertently offend Chinese, or Chinese might be inadvertently offended by either American or German culture, which tends to be a bit more kind of straightforward or brash.
Yeah.
British culture is more refined and more polite. And I actually think that that's a huge help in terms of marrying egos and marrying relationships.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because this is one of the things, and you use different language, but you essentially made that point in the chat where I got to know you initially, which is that it does seem like the cultures inadvertently do have more parallels and more opportunity to be able to communicate. What's something else? I'm saying this by way of getting to my next point before I say it. That's something that absolutely, you say it and I got it right away. And I have not actually heard anyone articulate that before. Mostly because, frankly, most people aren't most people in the universe that I'm in are not talking about the UK so much. But what's something else that you know, like you know it in your gut, in your head, like you know it to be true that maybe has not been very publicly demonstrated yet?
Definitely. Well, I think that in terms of our industry, there's a great example of the kind of experience of the average British writer and British talent, which is that from a small European country that speaks English, we have a kind of unique perspective on the global content industry. So I very much see kind of the global industry as, the US Hollywood system, the Chinese system, and then kind of everywhere else. And those are the kind of three systems. I put London and the UK kind of at the capital of everywhere else of international. And I think that, the reason that British writers and British creatives are good at working in somewhere as foreign from the UK as China is because we have experience working across these systems. So what I mean by that is a British writer will normally have experience working for Hollywood producers and within the studio system to some degree, be it feature screenplays or often in writers' rooms. They obviously have experience within the British domestic system, which tends to be driven by government-based
it's like arts grants kind of a system.
Arts council grants, particularly in the film industry. The TV industry is more commercial, but although, is very much led by the prestige of the BBC and Channel 4, both of which are different funding models, but both of which are publicly owned. Obviously, there's ITV and Sky as well, but they, the point is it's a very specific type of content that we make in the UK, and we make it very, very well. And then but crucially, we're also used to dealing with European and other international countries and international audiences. So British audiences are very used to co-producing with the French. They're very used to co-producing with the Germans, even, with Eastern European countries or Russia. These are cultures which are very different to the UK, and they have language barriers. So we're used to working in these kind of environments.
That's all I have for you guys.
Exactly. So I think that there hasn't been that much historic engagement between the UK and China, not due to any lack of interest, but because there hasn't been an entity like ours before. The UK industry, is very balkanized, very fragmented. Unlike China or the US, where you have sort of one-stop shops, vertically integrated studios that can do everything from development, production to distribution, the UK tends, there are some examples of this being different, but it tends to be defined by the indie scene. So small independent companies will develop projects and then work with other small independent companies to finance them and put them together. And that's why we often need to pre-sell to other territories, and why we always have to co-produce with European territories and so forth if we're not co-producing.
There's not enough firepower just within the company, and you just want to mitigate the risk. And
Well,
even if you have the money, you want to spend it all.
And to my knowledge, I could well be wrong to any sort of British listeners who are keen to correct me, but to my knowledge, even the likes of Working Title don't sort of finance and distribute their own films. They do it as kind of a supply deal with Universal. So there's in almost every instance outside of small British Film Institute films, there is sort of cultural collaboration on British projects. Be it, the most common is with the US, but even the US-UK relationship requires some degree of kind of cultural affinity and an ability to kind of look across cultures. So I say all that to say we're in a situation where we've got really terrific talent, but very, very small companies. And these very small companies don't have the manpower or the finances to have a loss-leading China office. Whilst they, understand the regulatory environment, whilst they understand the legal environment, whilst they understand the cultural and taste environment. So what you often get is sort of people just coming over here for a week or two, trying to set up their projects, bringing a British sensibility to China, and receiving a lot of interest, but ultimately not having the savvy or the market awareness of how to follow up. So where we come into the picture, and what we've been doing even before the trade war between the U.S. and China, is saying we represent all of these companies, and we can be the bridge for any British company or any British talent that would work well in China. And we do that in a variety of different ways, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a second.
Well, sure, and this actually does lead to some of the other things that are in my head and on my my checklist is what do you see as some of these? I mean, I don't even want to say low hanging fruit because I don't think there is much of that. No. but in terms of the real opportunities, what is really your focus with presently? And then we'll look in the crystal ball a little bit as we go. But.
Yeah, I mean, so presently, I think the major opportunity that exists in China, and I think it's a collaboration, it's a sort of exchange. It is to bring a best practice from the UK in terms of IP creation to the Chinese market. What we're seeing in terms of new government regulation is a desire for Chinese companies to create and distribute their own IP as opposed to importing it from overseas. Right. And I think that's really terrific because it allows the Chinese industry to unlock the many hundreds of years of culture, thousands of years of culture that they have here, and to really kind of stand on its own 2 feet in a way that it wouldn't be able to if most things were based on IPs from abroad. So I'm really excited about that. And what I think the kind of major opportunity for us and for the UK to engage with China at this point in their opening up and development is to work alongside Chinese companies on ideas they already have, be they, from a genre space, so sci-fi, thriller, suspense, action, so forth. Maybe something that hasn't been seen before in China, but there's a real market for it or an ambition for it. And what we can do is bring on board talent, be it writers, VFX supervisors, what have you, from the UK that can really help to create that Chinese IP and make it very, very strong. Yeah. Because what we have in the UK is a screen industry that dates back to 120 years. And the point I always make to my Chinese friends and collaborators is that, it took us in the West, 50 years to go from making Gunsmoke in the 1950s to Breaking Bad, or Peaky Blinders or Wolf Hall. It took a very long time for us to go to making premium television or blockbuster films. These are not things that happened overnight. Right. And we can bring a craft of screenwriting, a craft of plotting, narrative. That kind of craft is something you have to be trained in. And it takes a long time to get that training. And what we can do is help Chinese companies not just develop very strong IPs, because that craft transcends culture. I think the three act structure for a film transcends language or culture.
Yes.
And I think that bringing these writers over and these talents over will not only enable Chinese companies to enjoy the benefits of having a strong IP, but will also result in more training and collaborative exchange between the best practice of Britain and the emerging new market of the studio system with Chinese characteristics that we see rising in China.
What do you think of as some of some of these will be very obvious. It's okay to name check those en route to the deeper thing that maybe isn't spoken about. What do you see as some of the biggest challenges to this endeavor?
Absolutely. I mean, the challenges are definitely in existence. There is no doubt that China, all the movie business and the TV business is a relationship business. Yeah. And China, that's true for China as much as it is for any other country. So I'd say a major component is sort of language, culture, and relationships. If you don't have a language ability, which I don't, but the rest of my company does, I think you'll really struggle to convince the higher ups within, or the leaders within organizations who might not come from a content background. Right. That doing something in a different way is worthwhile. And to that point, you might not show you might not present yourself as that serious if you can't speak the language. In the same way that if a Chinese came to the UK trying to make a British film or bring Chinese services to British films and couldn't speak English, it would probably be very difficult for them. So I think language is a major issue. I think culture, of course, it requires a great deal of time spent in China. And I think that Chinese culture, once you begin to understand it, makes sense, but can appear to be not only makes sense, but is a tremendously deep and sophisticated culture. But if you aren't in, if you're just looking at it from the outside, from a Western perspective, it can be befuddling and perplexing. So I think that that's another element which might trip up some British talent working directly with Chinese companies. And I think, the relationship element, as China develops so quickly, it's important to have strong relationships with the right people, and it's important to have strong relationships with people who are interested in driving the country and the content in the right direction. I'm happy to say that over the 2 years that I've been coming to China, I've noticed a marked improvement in terms of the professionalism of the industry. Mm-hmm. And I think that in large part is due to the fact that there were some companies that were in a gold rush coming to get to trying to get to the Chinese
let's talk about
office.
this a bit. This has been touched on in previous episodes of the other show. But you said something along these lines in the speech on Sunday, and let's drill down into that a little bit. Can you, for the sake of the listener who maybe isn't as familiar with this, what are you talking about there?
Yeah, so I mean, of course, the Chinese box office on the theatrical side has gone from strength to strength, despite a sort of brief dip in 2016, and is on track to overtake the U.S. as the world's largest single box office. And there's been success stories, sort of unbelievable success stories, normally one a year, Wolf Warrior 2,
Sure.
Dying to Survive in 2018, and this year Wandering Earth. Let's see, maybe there'll be 2 this year.
Yeah.
And I think that that combined with the emerging dominance and size and value of the Chinese web, with Aichi, Tencent, and Youku, all frantically or all very interested in acquiring all types of content in order to drive subscribers to their platforms.
This is basically the Chinese versions of Hulu and Netflix.
Yeah, streaming SVOD services that are local to China. Although I understand Tencent is launching a service in Thailand, so it'll be interesting to see how that goes. But the thing that's very interesting is, I think it's been a very good time to be a Chinese content producer over the last 5 to 7 years, because there's been such a tremendous demand for content. But I think that with that kind of tremendous demand has come some players that don't come from industry backgrounds and are maybe in it for the wrong reasons. I mean, we saw a well-publicized tax scandal last year, which showed that some celebrities and A-list talent and production companies were, effectively, taking money from productions or, submitting incorrect paperwork to the government. 2
sets of books on the talent side.
Exactly. And I think that actually, as a result of that being brought to light by patriotic Chinese, there has been a correction within the industry, and a lot of these production companies that wouldn't be interested in developing high-end scripts or IP because they just wanted to release anything to receive a payout, have exited the space. So I see that, although some people describe this as a capital winter for the Chinese film industry, I don't see it like that. I see it more as a logical course correction, as all the bad producers have kind of exited the space, leaving space for the legitimate companies and emerging enterprises to grow and expand to fill the market. So I see it actually as a very exciting time to be a Chinese producer.
Yeah, I think so. And actually, I have this. This will be a slightly awkward segue, but I wanted to be sure to mention this. I get nothing from plugging this, and I'm doing it again. But along these lines, there's this book that the publication date is July 1, I believe, but it's a new screenwriting book from Michael Weesey Productions, and I sometimes get to blurb things for them in galleys, so I have a galley here, and it's from a guy named Waco Lin, and I mentioned this when we met on Sunday, and on the primary reason for it is that it's a screenwriting craft book, and he has a lot of interesting things to say and ways to say it, and he has a unique teaching style that, it's another good screenwriting book for somebody to have on the shelf. But what makes it unique and why I'm a fan of this book is that he has about 7 chapters here toward the back that are all about dealing with China, because he's from Taiwan, has worked a lot in the mainland, but he's lived in the U.S. for 25 years and he's a writer, and he's a writer and he's director and producer, and he goes through everything from like the major thou shalls and thou shalt nots in terms of content, but he really has a Chinese perspective on. He's trying to educate the international audience or the Hollywood audience, the international audience more broadly on how to deal with China. But by way of doing that, he's also explaining to Chinese who are trying to deal with the international system.
Absolutely.
Because he's comparing, here's how it works in the US or UK, and here's how it works in China. And here's where there's not a linkage, and here's where you have a possibility.
Exactly.
Here's a land bridge, here's maybe a footbridge.
And that's exactly the approach that we take. Our goal is not to compete with Chinese producers and try to seize a sort of slice of the box office from them.
Right.
Our goal is to collaborate with them to make the local Chinese content have all the best practices, all the best endeavors of a Western production.
Well, there was this conversation I had with somebody at that same event, actually, as a sidebar, that essentially amounted to it was a local producer at a big local company, and the gist of the conversation that's relevant is that she was explaining what they were looking for, and sort of she was taking my temperature to see what I thought, because we hadn't known each other previously, and she was essentially saying, she said, we're always looking for IP, we're always looking for ideas, we develop internally for the most part. But we want to have things that have a broader impact and stories that are more interesting to a global audience. And what do you think? And what I said in a nutshell was, I think that your market's at a point where if the best way to engage is, and this tracks very much with what you are saying, I think, but I'm saying this to get your opinion, is that I said for me, you have incredibly talented people in basically every category at this point. You have a maturely developed market in that sense. And I think the real opportunity, the remaining big opportunity, frankly, for foreigners that I see is to contribute in terms of an idea for an IP or an outline, but then let a local Chinese writer write it. And then they need the craft component, which is really what you've stressed here.
Absolutely.
So you think you think I'm...
Yeah, I think
I'm on the right track.
Exactly right. Yeah, I think that the way that the relationship has worked best, we have 3 Chinese language projects or mixed language projects in various stages of development now across film and TV. And I think that in all cases, the best way it has worked is to have a kind of concept or brief originate on the Chinese side, which, there's an awareness of, what the local market wants and what, is popular here. And then with that brief, which can often be as simple as something like 24 in Macau, a thriller set in Macau, right? Okay. It's then possible to link in a Western writer or a international, British or international writer with experience in this type of format, who can then contribute a lot toward the character development, the story arcs, and the beats that are necessary for telling a story across. Because
it's going to travel well.
Exactly, and we're also seeing content get shorter and shorter in the UK. In China, in terms of episode runs. Traditionally we've seen 70+ episodes on the platforms. Yeah. Now we're seeing episodes becoming more premium, series becoming more premium. Excuse me, which is very exciting, because that means that there's a real opportunity to make high end.
You do higher
content.
quality.
Exactly,
higher quality. To crank out. It's not like a soap opera in the US or anywhere. Where
and it's great because it means that the Chinese market is becoming more amenable to different types of content and different genres, and that's really exciting. And that's all the more reason for Chinese companies to collaborate with British companies, who, of course, are the world leaders in making sort of particularly short form content, 6 to 8 parts. I would say. So there's a variety of things, and then you've touched on this idea of disseminating Chinese IP abroad, and I think that for us is our end goal in this market. So we're aware that the window of opportunity to work with Chinese companies to help craft Chinese IP from the UK is a closing window. Yeah. We're aware that the window is being rapidly filled by local talent, and our goal is to help Chinese companies make that process even faster. by learning from an established market like the United Kingdom. And then down the line, our perspective very much, what we would very much like to do is, as the quality of Chinese content continues to improve, and again, in the 2 years I've been doing this, I've seen it improve vastly. And as that, as it continues to improve, what we would love to do is be in a great position to help introduce these great Chinese IPs to the rest of the world, which is something, and I mentioned it in my speech on Sunday, something the UK has done very well out of. A country of 65 million people is the second largest content exporter in the world after the US. And the way that we are, the reason we're good at that is we're good at distributing British content internationally, introducing international cultures to British IP, but then we're also good at reformatting, remaking content in other territories, selling scripted formats. So what we want to do is be in a good position after helping to improve the quality of Chinese IP, very original Chinese IP. We then want to be in a position to introduce that IP to the rest of the world, both in terms of finished tape and in the form of scripted formats. And in doing so, again, our goal, we really see our collaboration with China as, it's good for us in that it's financially sound, but it's also good for China.
Right.
Because we help the Chinese develop local IP, better quality stories, makes it more competitive in their home territory, and ultimately the pivot is helping to introduce that IP to the rest of the world, which we're, of course, in a privileged position to do as Westerners who understand the Chinese industry.
Well, you hit on the success, and again, in between the different shows I do and just the people I know and conversations I've had with, business leaders and some very successful serial entrepreneurs working internationally, what you just hit on is a key in general, but it's really so specifically important here is what can you do for China, or what can you do for the other party? And I'm getting that everything you're saying is congruent with a focus on that.
Absolutely.
So that's you have to have that. If you're only, that's the biggest problem. And I won't say too much because you know this, and I yacked about it in other mediums a lot. And when I'm interviewed, I don't do too many of these generic interviews these days, but basically the biggest problem with China, on the Hollywood side, one of the biggest problems is this cultural issue of how transactional we are. And it's very hit and run. And again, you can fly in, do the thing, get out, and then you have a deal, and that deal stands.
Absolutely.
And it's really the opposite here, as has been detailed countlessly in other mediums.
Yeah, we kind of orientalize the concept of guanxi in the West, but I think that it's a pretty common human occurrence that people like to have long-standing relationships and do business with people they trust, particularly across countries. And and I think that one of the issues Hollywood has had engaging with China is that because that initial engagement was so financially focused,
right,
and because there's a reluctance, I think, within the studio system to change, to adapt to different models.
Sure. They
came expecting to do things in China the Hollywood way, whereas anyone sophisticated in working with China knows that they want to do the Chinese want to do things in a way that is similar to the West, but with Chinese characteristics.
Yes.
And our, and to go in and attempt to, just pump the Chinese for money, which is what, some platforms and some producers have done, and some particularly unsavvy ones continue to do,
right,
is a losing battle, because the Chinese are a proud culture that are keen to make their own local content that can stand on its own 2 feet, not simply finance Star Trek 4.
What is something, this is one of those if I knew you better questions, hence the title and the premise of this show, related to anything. Doesn't have to be related to business, although it can be. When is the last time you were angry, and why? Such that you could talk about. So you could be as generic in the why as you have to be.
Yeah. I think that, I won't, let me think about it.
Sure.
Last time I was angry. I mean, I think that one of the difficulties of doing what I do, which is, international and Chinese, exporting British creative services overseas, is that inevitably you're not going to be with people all the time, and therefore it's easy for miscommunications to emerge. I would say, it's worth saying our business is not just focused on China. We work with a lot of other territories, and actually in all reality, I really have never had a bad experience with someone I've been doing business with in China, and I'm not just saying that. That is the truth.
People tend to try to go out of their way to make it work.
Yeah.
If they're interested, they want to try to
Absolutely.
make it work.
And I actually find that Chinese are very good. You know, we have, again, this kind of orientalizing of the Chinese never say no, but they actually do, I find.
You just don't know that that's what they're saying.
Yeah, if you don't know, in the same way that Brits don't say.
It's like a Hollywood no. They used to say Sherry Lansing when she ran Paramount gave the best no in Hollywood.
Yeah,
It's like you never.
Yeah, exactly.
You realize I think she didn't.
Exactly.
We don't have a deal, but God, I feel good. That was a great meeting.
Exactly.
It's like people almost wanted to have the meeting just to get the no from her.
That's the kind of joke between the UK and the US is that the US is all yes, 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 no, and then the UK is no, 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 yes.
Yeah,
which is the kind of joke. But I think the UK is similar. We really do a good job of people are. Not you have to read the signals,
right?
But what I would say is, I think the times that I have been angry recently in terms of doing this business are good learning experiences for me, because I think that everyone involved in the content business, with the exception of outright criminals, of which there are some, but we're all motivated by a love of stories and by making high quality content that people want to watch.
Yeah.
No matter where you are in the world, if you're in China or in Indonesia or Thailand or France or wherever. And I think that sometimes, particularly when you're separated by distance, I won't mention. We've had 2 deals on the TV side, international TV side, where there have been miscommunications that have led to frustrating deals being postponed or falling through. Yeah. And I think that in retrospect. At the time I was very angry because I felt that certain cultural stereotypes were being made to be true. And again, this isn't China. This is another similar
market,
another market, another big country. But I felt like I had been lied to, and that the deal had been presented to me under false pretenses. And as any producer will tell you, as you well know, I'm sure, a lot of being a producer is putting your own reputation on the line for others.
Exactly.
And saying, these guys have said that they'll do this, and these, it's deal making, but it's also in the film industry.
And you have to take people at their word to a certain degree,
exactly.
and based on precedent of, they've done these other things that happened, and
exactly.
So what did they turn into?
Exactly. And
different person all of a sudden.
Exactly. And so, I think that I've been frustrated on these 2 things in particular, and looking back at it, I realized that, probably nobody was really in this to get me or to hurt me or to hurt my business. What happened was, long, being far apart, having, a big delay between, conversations led to kind of local, a local interpretation of recent events, which then contributed to a misunderstanding.
Right.
So if anything, I think it's not a particularly kind of fun answer.
No, it's a real answer.
But I think that for me, it's an understanding that you can never take your partner in another country, particularly a country that's far away, for granted. I think that really what you need to do is make sure you have conversations frequently, make sure you have expectations outlined in writing, not just in sort of casual phone calls or at markets. And I think that looking back at it, I learned 2 things. One, that you need to make sure you're on the same page from the very beginning, and that you are constantly in communication about what page you're on. And 2, even broken deals and broken ideas can lead to new opportunities. So in both these cases, I managed to sort of pick up what one party wanted to do and then slot it in with something else. And there's always a way forward in this industry, particularly if you're in this international space, because really anything is possible. Any kind of collaboration is possible.
I think that strategy has been also the winning one from people I see who are mentors or models for me, whether directly or whether just through observation, people who've been able to have success. As we're sort of beginning to land the plane here, what's something that you wish you were better at? With, of course, the caveat that, you'd be working on it, or you are working on it. But what's something that you wish you were better at right now?
You know what I'm terrible at, and this is quite a frivolous answer, but I'm going to give it to you because it's really frustrated me recently. I'm just so, I'm very organized when it comes to business and accounts and anything that can be done digitally. I'm very organized at. Yeah. But when it comes to physical objects,
okay,
like my keys or like physical, keeping things physically organized in real life.
Okay, all right.
I'm so bad at it.
Yeah.
I lose stuff all the time, and I'm just the kind of guy where I kind of I walk into. I've probably done it in your place here. I'll just put my wallet here and then walk over there and put my keys there. And
okay.
And I'm just I don't know. It's just I've just forgotten stuff recently. I never forget my passport or anything serious like that. Or anything really serious, but I'm just so bad at keeping things tidy and organized, and I've really been working on it recently.
Nice.
And I don't know, it's just it's the kind of thing where I think maybe I just need to hire a personal assistant, personal tidier,
like a body man, where it's here's all my stuff.
Exactly. Yeah.
They always
just hold on to
Dave's
it.
got my stuff.
Yeah,
Dave's always got my phone.
Dave, yeah, exactly. I need to hire a Dave-esque figure. So yeah, it's really that's something that I need to get better at. So
well, that's funny. Truthfully, that was one of I like that answer, especially because I can relate. That is something. My little system, if you craned your head back and look at the little by the table, I keep everything in one place.
Yes.
I just developed the habit of I have a place. Yeah. Or I'm giving you advice that you didn't ask for, or the advice was the specific advice.
It was
or
the
both.
specific advice.
I suck at it, and the way that I learned to not lose all my stuff was just, damn it, it goes one place.
Yep. Well,
and I've got my run bag, and everything has its own little pocket.
Yep.
And I just had to channel a little bit of my producer OCD into that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's let me free up the part of my brain that worried about that.
Yep. Well, you've got a very, very tidy flat here.
That's the advantage of I have a nice little live work space here, and this is the advantage for me. As I was telling you beforehand, I'd rather have a nicer but small place, and be able to keep it clean for one thing. And also, just it's hard to lose things.
Yeah,
if you intentionally don't have a lot of things.
But have you seen that? What's that Japanese show about tidying up?
Oh, I know the Kumari thing.
Something.
I have not. I know. I'm familiar with it.
You know what I'm talking about?
I'm familiar with it.
I'm I can't watch that because I think if I watch it, I might just have a heart attack.
You feel
or something. Because people, oh yeah, it's completely changed my life. I've spent hours cleaning all this stuff. And I'm this person already was so much tidier than me.
Their before picture makes you feel guilty.
Exactly. So if I watch, I don't know, I'd be such an unattainable goal. I'd just have my head would explode.
Oh my God, that is hilarious. Well, who or what do you most credit for helping equip you for success?
Oh, I would say, I would say success is still in the future for me. I hope to attain it one day in a
successfully
meaningful way.
Proceeding toward your goals. Let's say it like that.
Proceeding. I would have to give a shout out to Karen Mandabak, who is on the board of my company of Clipper Media Capital, who is the best known recently as a producer of Peaky Blinders, but used to work in Hollywood, produced The Cosby Show, That 70s Show, and many other
I know her by name. I don't
absolutely.
know her.
And I think Karen, for me, although she didn't have a kind of third culture background, she invented sort of what I'm doing today by moving from Hollywood to the UK at a time when she was an extremely successful Hollywood producer, didn't necessarily know everyone in the UK, and came over and managed to make the best show of the golden age of British TV, Peaky Blinders. And her support and help for me has been invaluable in terms of learning how to negotiate contracts and so forth, but also just the ambition and the kind of her drive to do things her own way and in a way that is more equitable for the producer, the people who really put the work in.
Right.
Over the means of distribution is really admirable. And, she moved to the UK so she could retain more ownership of her projects. In the US, we haven't touched on this at all, but the US ownership is always taken by the studios.
Well, that's part of why I don't do studio stuff.
Exactly. And that's why the international space is such a good space. If you can make it work, is such a good space to be a producer because you can have much more ownership of your finished projects. And I think Karen is the single greatest example of that happening. And I'm really very grateful that she's on my board.
When did you connect with her? At what point in your process?
When I moved back to London, I was introduced by one of the producers of House of Cards' wife. Introduced me to Karen.
You've known her now for roughly
sometime
for a while.
4 years. Yeah,
that's really great. Yeah. I have a few of those mentors. Carl Bressler is one of them. He's been on the show before. Actually, he's one of the earlier guests. Last question: what's the best question about yourself that I didn't ask?
Oh, interesting.
Well, and you can take that however you want. Maybe something that's on your mind I didn't bring up. Things like that.
You could say something like why, where'd you get your beard trimmer or something? But,
well, I mean, is that a little too generic for you? I mean,
no, I'm trying to think of something better than that. Why?
That's not too bad.
No, yeah. Where'd you get your beard trimmer? I think where sometimes people ask me. About like a work-life balance, that's like, and how you can marry, being effectively a startup and having, all these exciting projects, but sort of pushing everything with such a small company all over the world. And I think that the answer to that is that it's important for what I do to be both incredibly international and very local. So it requires a real kind of focus, zeroing in on one thing. And I think, I would quote Jack Ma for a great piece of advice, which he didn't give me personally, but I read in his book.
Sure.
Which was, if there are 6 rabbits in the field, catch one, which I think is a really, really good piece of advice, because I think when you're a producer, when you work in this industry or any deal-making industry, it's very tempting to go overboard, sort of spread yourself too thin. So I'm very happy to say that our company has, executed 4 deals in the sort of Chinese space, 3 development, 1 distribution, and we have many other deals in the pipeline. But I feel much more comfortable being able to say that than say we've done no deals, but we have 50 potential deals.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, Michael, I look forward to continuing the conversation. I think you are on a fantastic and a correct track from my point of view and all the people I talk to, both from my experience and putting other people as higher authorities than me who I've learned from. I think you're really you're doing something in a way that is viable, and you're doing something that there's a need for.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to seeing where this goes for you.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Brendan. It's been a pleasure. I hope we can come back to your apartment and have a few beers sometime.
I think that's a great idea. Thanks, man.
Nice to see you. Cheers.
Thanks, man. All right, that's the show this week. I hope you enjoyed it. Please visit crazyinagoodway.com to find out more about Michael and all my other guests on the other shows, everything else that's going on. Don't forget to check back next week for a in-depth philosophical show. If that's your jam, I'm going to really get into it. And for now, though, thank you for listening. Please subscribe, share, rate, review, and I will see you next week.